Good day, my friends. You know, the past couple videos of these that I've made, I kind of made fun of 14's writing and character development in more ways than one. From Menphilia being made the damsel in distress all the time, to the writers thinking that Lise was a one-size-fits-all kind of character when she really wasn't. But today we're going to go over a character that did so much better than he, frankly, had any right to. He practically carried an entire expansion on his back, and the narrative surrounding him made us want more. Today, we're going to look into the reasons why I loved Emet-Selch, or more specifically, Hades. We have to understand that Hades as a character, at least in the Final Fantasy franchise, has appeared a few times already. Hades isn't a super recurring character like some of the other Final Fantasy favorites like, say, Odin or Leviathan, but he's appeared enough to warrant a seat at the table. But those are the versions of Hades before 14. What about the one we experience in-game? In Final Fantasy XIV, Hades, or as he's more commonly known, Emet-Selch, was a member of the Convocation 14. Emet-Selch isn't a name so much as it is a title. A title belonging to the member of the Convocation that oversees the ethereal realm. You see, each member of the Convocation was responsible for something. You had one seat that was responsible for aquatic life, another for flora, another for fauna. But the seat of Emet-Selch was reserved for making sure that the ethereal realm was always in a state of peace. After all, the ethereal realm is the etheric core of our world. If something were to happen to it, then everything in our world would become destabilized, or ultimately destroyed. Lives would no longer return to the life stream. Newborns would no longer have the souls necessary to become individuals. So Emet-Selch's position is extremely important, and few could argue that the one most qualified was Hades himself. But before we move forward, I want it to be known that I'm going to address this character without all of the Endwalker nonsense that involves Emet-Selch. And to anyone who's played the expansion, you know exactly what I mean. So let's address his position in the narrative and how it made such an impact. Emet-Selch as a character was released rather late into the game. He only appeared at the tail end of the Stormblood expansion right before Shadowbringers. Sure, he had a lot of historical significance, being the one who orchestrated the events of the Allegan Empire, the Garlean Empire, and likely the fall of the civilization of Mach as well. So, already we understand that he knows people. Not only does he know people, he knows what they want and how to manipulate them. To him, it's like watching children scramble around on a playground, easily directed towards the next shiny thing. This is what made organizing these empires and creating the rejoinings relatively easy for him. And yet, for someone who loves life, he was extremely willing to take it. It may sound funny that I would say that Emet-Selch loves life, but you have to remember his position. As the overseer of the ethereal realm, he is ultimately responsible for ensuring that the souls of the deceased return to the lifestream and have the chance to be reborn again. This is likely what made him committing genocide over and over so much easier for him than anyone else. To him, the picture was so big that your death was inconsequential because you would be reborn again later down the line anyways, and the cycle would repeat ad nauseum. He wasn't killing you so much as he was removing you from the game before you came back to the table. Of course, anyone else would say that's still murder, and I would be inclined to believe them over Emet-Selch on that one. As guaranteed as the life cycle in this world is, filling the world with death, pain, and sorrow would ultimately wound the ethereal realm in the long term, like polluting the waters of a once proud spring. And yet, despite all of that, he continued on. And then we finally arrive at the events of Shadowbringers. And during his first cutscene where he speaks of the signs of the Seventh Dawn, he already stole the show. He laid all of his cards out on the table. He never lied, because ultimately, he wanted an excuse to stop. And this is what made me fall in love with the character of Emet-Selch. It wasn't so much his quirky, creative, and sarcastic personality that won me over, even though his charm was definitely there in spades. No, what got me was that from the very beginning, he was a multifaceted character that you only got to see more of later down the line. It was great. Emet-Selch showed the audience and the Scions of the Seventh Dawn exactly what the perspective of the Ascians was. To them, they weren't committing murder so much as trying to bring you back to what you once were. They would kill you 13 times over if it meant becoming your true self once again, because in the end, you would thank them. Wouldn't you? Which ultimately became a question that would gnaw at Emet-Selch's mind and eventually drive him insane. Sure, it was easy to follow the plan at first. Commit a rejoining, empower the souls on the source, move on to the next shard. Repeat until the source is whole once again, and their glorious civilization is made whole once more. But then you have to factor in exactly how long it has taken for them just to get to 7 rejoinings. Now, we have records of the 4th, 5th, and 6th astral era, and every one of those eras lasted about 1,500 years. So, if we simply follow that trend and add all of the astral eras together, Emet-Selch has been trying to rejoin the world for at least 9,000 years. 9,000 years of having to watch civilizations rise, fall, die, and be reborn from the ashes over and over again. And even as the overseer of the ethereal realm, it likely started to drive him mad watching so many souls go in and out of the lifestream, because ultimately, that's not how the ethereal realm is supposed to work. This cycle of souls isn't meant to be done en masse like that, and he knew this. Which is why meeting him in Shadowbringers is such an absolute treat, because you get to see someone who's only halfway done with their labors and they're already exhausted. And you see it in his physical stance. He's hunched over almost all the time, his eyes are sunken, and he has the attitude of someone who doesn't care if things go well or poorly. He's just going with the flow at this point. He lost all of his motivation a long time ago, and he's only doing what he does for the sake of a dream. Which brings me to what I believe is the crux of his character. The man that wanted everything but could never have it. Because no matter how justified he believed his actions in committing these genocides for the sake of rejoinings were, he was committing what he believed to be an even greater sin. He was murdering his best friend over and over again. To understand what I mean by this, you have to understand that Emet-Selch wasn't always the most social person, even back during the Age of the Ancients. He was standoffish, a bit of a tsundere, if you will. But underneath that rugged exterior was someone who actually did have a deep-seated heart for empathy. He understood pain, he understood the struggle of self-worth, and when push came to shove, he was willing to share his strength with others. But there were 2 people that he prized above all else. One was a man named Hythlodaeus. The other was another member of the Convocation 14, the seat of Azem. Back when Zodiark was first summoned, Hythlodaeus willingly offered his soul to the summoning so that the primal could be brought into being. But this meant that Emet-Selch would never see his friend again, so long as Zodiark existed. This made Emet-Selch believe with all his heart that performing the rejoinings would be the best way to get one of his best friends back. So on one hand, he was not only orchestrating these events for the sake of his society, but for the sake of people he loved as well. But then we get to the other half. Azem the Traveler refused to partake in the summoning of Zodiark. They also refused to partake in the summoning of Hydaelyn. So even if he was never willing to admit it, Emet-Selch knew that his other friend was out there in the world, somewhere, existing, living, and dying. With every umbral calamity, he likely murdered Azem over and over again. Knowing that Hythlodaeus was trapped within Zodiark haunted him, But it was likely the constant killing of Azem that broke him. Because he knew he couldn't have that perfect world that he envisioned without hurting his best friend 13 times over. And even after it was all said and done, would they ever smile at Emet-Selch ever again the same way they did before, knowing what he did to them? Which is why Emet-Selch broke. Deep down, he did not want to perform the rejoinings anymore. He walked amongst the people of the astral eras, hoping beyond hope that they reflected some sort of philosophy or desires that the ancients once had. Because if they were similar stewards to the world just like they were, he would have a reason to halt the genocide and stop hurting his friend. But every time he found them wanting, and every time he was disappointed by how selfish, greedy, and self-important everyone in the world was. And so he felt justified in continuing his march, a path he no longer wanted to walk. Which is why the culmination of his actions in Shadowbringers are so fascinating. When he saw a glimpse of the spirit of Azem within the Warrior of Light, he panicked. Not only was he about to hurt his friend again, but this time it would be by his own hands. But he was tempered by Zodiark and couldn't willingly back down from a challenge. So he fought, and ultimately lost. But this is why he smiled at the end of it all. He was finally able to lay down his arms. No longer would he be forced to choose between his friends. No longer would he be forced to watch the things he cared about burn over and over again. He simply smiled, knowing that the future would be safe in the hands of someone he treasured above all else. And this is what I found fascinating about Emet-Selch as a character. And honestly, this is what I believe made people fall in love with Emet-Selch so much more than any other character. It wasn't just his quirky personality. It was the fact that the writers sold us on this character that was so exhausted from his labors and willing to lay down his rights. He was a broken man, but in the end, he was happy. Because in the end, even though he was slain by Azem, it was only fair. After all, he'd killed his best friend so many times over already. He was waiting and hoping beyond hope that with every rejoining, the sun would rise on a beautiful civilization. A civilization where both of his friends would be there waiting for him. And while that dream would never have come to pass, it's not without hope. With the destruction of Zodiark and the removal of Hydaelyn, the world is free to go back to its natural cycle. And one day, maybe, the souls of Azem, Hades, and Hythlodaeus will walk, talk, and laugh together once more. And that will be the day that the sun truly rises on Emet-Selch's dream. And that, my friends, will bring an end to this video. Until next we meet, reflect on the choices Emet-Selch made, the reasons behind his madness. And until we meet again, stay safe, my friends. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Big shout out to my patrons, Rovakis, Monsolo97, Potato, Runatir, The Yellow Couch, Papaya Cyan, and Vavala Soma. If you want to see more lore content in the future, share this with your friends. My dream is to share as much as I find with as many people as possible. And if you do end up helping me, thank you so much in advance. And have a wonderful day.